Okay, now let's talk about observational research. Obviously, the difference between observational research and interviewing is we're not so much focused on what people say as we are in the interview, but we're really interested in observing what people are doing in their actual habitat of use. We're studying people in their natural habitats, that is their work environment, for example. So our job is to study users in their natural setting and understand how they interact with the environment. So that could include materials. We could focus on who they communicate with and about what. We might care about what forms they fill out or what kinds of interaction they have to do with a computer or a handheld device or something like that. We look at what seems to make them visibly nervous, what seems to be frustrating to them, annoying, etc. These are things that aren't really easily uncovered when you're just asking people questions, when you're talking to them in an office or a focus group facility or something like that. The environment makes a world of difference. Sometimes you just need to be there to really understand. So as usual in all of these, in almost all of these pictures, these are pictures that we've taken from research projects that we've worked on, in this case with firefighters. But as you can see, people can tell you how hot the fire is, and they can tell you how heavy the equipment is and how hot it is and how much they have to carry on their back and all of those kinds of things. But you don't really get an appreciation for it until you've been there yourself. And that's what observation enables you to do. So again, people can describe the difficulties of climbing around and retrieving people from a building or even just climbing a ladder to get places, but you've got to be there to see it. The same thing with even things like cleaning up an OR room after orthopedic surgery, for example, when you're redesigning a hospital bed. You don't really get a sense for the difficulties or the problems and so forth until you see it in person. Now, clearly observation's important. Where I see people doing it inappropriately, however, is simply not planning ahead to understand exactly what they want to observe and what they're going to focus on. So this is one of the places I always encourage people to spend a lot of time on. Identify ahead of time what questions you have and you would plan to answer. Remember, research is not really research unless you have a question you're trying to answer. So figure out what those questions are ahead of time. Also understand who you want to observe, what roles you're interested in paying attention to and so forth, and maybe even which activities you're interested in observing. What communications, perhaps, you want people to observe, or what devices or tools you want to see being used. Those are just good examples. Now, along the way, you'll notice all kinds of things, but you have to have your main focus first. Things you will learn about along the way might include things like responsibilities, who does what and when, what sequence of activities happens, that is what happens first versus second versus third, etc. Problems that can occur. You'll be certainly privy to activities that seem particularly difficult and why they're difficult, how people kind of troubleshoot problems and fix them, how a task or activity is kicked off or initiated, and how people know that they've done things correctly when they actually have done things correctly. Those are all really important things if you're trying to identify new product opportunities or trying to design a product that fits into a particular set of needs as well as a set of environments. So up until this time, we've been talking a lot about interviewing users and also observing what they do. Contextual inquiry is a term you'll hear fairly often, and what it does is kind of combines those two things. Its point is that a lot of the information we care about is in the context, that is in the environment, and that's why we go observe people. But on the other hand, since we have them there, maybe it would be helpful to observe them for a little while and then be able to ask them questions. And that's what we're doing during contextual inquiry. So it's immersive in the sense that we're there, we're actually observing and so forth, but we also can weigh in with some questions from time to time. So this gives you an example. This fellow could tell us all about flight planning and so forth. in an office somewhere, but while he's doing it right before a flight is even better, because that's where he would normally do it. There's kind of 4 principles that are important in this. One is context, which I already mentioned. There's a lot that goes on in the environment that you're going to want to know about, so you're going to want to kind of understand that context. There's partnership, and I think the partnership is a good one. I tend to focus on kind of this master-apprentice model. That is, I'll ask the participant, the person I'm interviewing, to act like the expert, because typically they are the expert and I'm an apprentice. In that sense, their job is to teach me as much as they can about what they do, why they do it, etc. And that makes it so that they kind of dumb down their language so that I can understand it better, since I'm a novice. And it also makes them sort of be in a position where they're ready for me to ask some pretty basic questions. Some questions that they haven't been asked in a long time, much like an apprentice would, somebody who doesn't know very much about the field. It seems to be a model that works really well. The third is interpretation. You'll observe things, but then you'll want to understand the meaning behind them. Why did that happen? What does it mean that something went wrong? What are the implications for that problem? And then double checking your interpretation. So sometimes I'll go back and read back my notes to that master, right? I'm the apprentice. I'll read back, okay, here's what I think I saw. Does this match what you're thinking? And they'll correct me, or they'll elaborate on what they were thinking. And that's a really helpful thing to do. And then finally, just plain focus. This goes with our notion of understanding what questions we want to ask ahead of time. Understanding that I plan on focusing on this one component for the time being, and then I'll do another contextual inquiry later to focus on another component. That way I'm not trying to do everything at once. Remember, humans have a very limited, or you'll learn about this in future lectures, very limited attentional system. And as a result, being able to focus is really critical to be able to do the work you need to do. Other parts that are interesting in here and that you'll get exposed to is just artifacts that people either create or use. So these are things that, kind of are used for work. So these are examples from some flight research I did. These were with private pilots, and they use things like, they call them approach plates and things like that to help figure out where they're going to land and so on. And understanding when they use those, how they use them, what's good about them, what's bad about them, and so forth, was very helpful in the design of a display we were creating. It reveals a lot of aspects about the organization of how people work. It's also important during this time to understand the physical environment, and that's information you wouldn't get just by asking people questions. You can look for areas where specific types of work get done, where people place things so that they're easily accessible, etc. All of those things can be found in the physical environment. So this is really just kind of a comparison and a contrast between contextual inquiry versus just a plain old interview. During contextual inquiry, you're actually going to try to observe people doing things and clarify them so that you can understand. It's a teacher-apprentice model. Basically, we start by observing exactly what they do and then understand their intentions. The teacher kind of leads through this, etc. Whereas an interview, it's much more, I ask questions and the participant answers. And hopefully I understand after that. So you can see that things are a little bit flipped on their heads with contextual inquiry. It's a little bit more focused on the participant than it is on the person doing the research. So I hope that's helpful in talking a little bit about observational research. Obviously there's lots to learn here about it, but this is a good start.